Hi, everyone. Today's episode comes with a quick content warning. The movie that we're reviewing today includes references to suicide. We talk about that a little bit around the 33-minute mark. Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with...
I'm Dr. Kimberly Plomp. I am a bioarchaeologist. I study the human skeleton, health and disease, and evolution.
And I'm Dr. Ross Barnett, a paleogeneticist interested in ice age extinctions and phylogenetics.
And this weekend, we are participating in an online event called #RealArchaeology, which is taking place October 25th to 27th. It's organized by Flint Dibble and a few other archaeology content creators, including a friend of our podcast, Frederick Trusaham of the Digging Up Ancient Aliens podcast. So if this is your first episode and you found us through this event, welcome. Why not listen to the episode? If you like it, subscribe, give us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts, or give us a like on YouTube. And if you're a regular listener and you don't know what the hell we're talking about, check out real-archaeology.com. It's an event to promote archaeology content creators, podcasts, YouTube, TikTok, blogs. There's all kinds of people, all kinds of archaeologists creating really cool, real archaeology content. So if you like the kind of stuff we talk about, you want to hear more about archaeology, check that out. A whole bunch of podcasts and YouTube channels that I already subscribe to, and a whole bunch more that I've never heard of. So I've found a few more things to subscribe to there myself. And with that said, today we are reviewing a scary movie because it's only a few days before Halloween. This one is actually scary. The one we watched last week was not very scary.
So we're doing Tar this week, right? Because that's what I watched.
God damn it.
No.
We watched As Above, So Below from 2014.
Did you watch it again, Kim, or are you just going by your notes from the other time you watched it?
I never take notes. I'm not a good student. I just looked at the Wikipedia again.
If you're new to the podcast, we typically review Stone Age movies, stuff about cavemen or the Ice Age or stuff like that. This movie isn't about the Stone Age, but sometimes we do venture into movies just more generally about archaeology, and this is definitely an archaeology movie, so we'll have a lot of archaeology stuff to say about it. Who wants to summarize this movie for listeners that haven't seen it?
Well, it's been a week since I watched it, so Ross should probably summarize.
Okay.
Plus, he does a better job anyways.
All right. So this is a film I've watched before. Quite liked it the first time around. Did I suggest it? Possibly.
I'm not sure. It was on our list. I gave you a list of a few different scary movies and let you choose the two for October.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's miles ahead of Tar in terms of quality. Anyway. So it starts off and it just sort of throws you straight in there. You kind of meet an unnamed woman who is kind of searching underground with her Middle Eastern accomplice. He wants to show her some kind of engraving which has kind of words on it in a non-English language. She immediately decides to break right through this after translating it, destroying it forever, and goes through. And when she goes through, she finds a kind of massive Assyrian-style bowl with inscriptions all over. She's got a camera. This is very much a kind of found footage style of film, so everything is kind of from a handheld camera perspective. But as she's kind of breaking things and filming this giant carved bowl, we hear a countdown and things are going crazy. There's people looking for her. It's really kind of quite manic as an introduction. You don't know what the hell's going on, but there's a kind of sense of danger, and that her guide / friend says they're about to blow this place up for reasons that are never explained. So she's got like time limit. He says he has to go. He has a family. Fair enough. He rushes off, and she kind of hangs around filming everything through her handheld camera before leaving again. just as the place is collapsing. As she leaves, she very weirdly sees a man hanging from the ceiling, like a classic. We don't know if this is real, or is this unnamed Middle Eastern country hanging people underground and then blowing it up. I was confused, but she sees this, doesn't stop, and rushes back to the house of her aide, who has a secret passage to the secret passage, which leads to the other secret passage. And so she just makes it out while everything's kind of collapsing all around her. And we kind of then cut back to a kind of face-to-camera interview. We have an introduction to this woman that's been our kind of camera person for the first part of the film. She's called Scarlett. She works at, I think, UCL, she says. She has 3 PhDs, which I guess to the general public suggests somebody who's super smart, but to people with PhDs suggests somebody who can't make their bloody mind up.
Doesn't want to leave the safe cocoon of being
doesn't ever actually want to get a real job. That's what it suggests to me. But she says...
you could do that just by taking 6 years to do every degree like I'm doing.
Yeah, you could. You could. But we learn a bit about Scarlett. She has degrees in chemistry and urban archaeology. We learn a bit about her father, who was also an archaeologist who is obsessed with the Philosopher's Stone. Her father had killed himself earlier. I think the interviewing kind of style is suggesting that maybe this had a big effect on Scarlett. And then we get some exposition about how she's interested in finding out about Nicholas Flamel, the famous alchemist who lived in Paris in the, I think, 18th century, who readers of Harry Potter will be familiar with, no doubt. But she's in Paris because she has to get this bull with all the inscriptions on it, which she calls the what does she call it? The Rose Key. She has to get that translated, and there's only one person she knows that can do that, who is a guy called George. So she goes to find George, who is working, it seems, on fixing the bells in Notre Dame, which seems pretty cool as a job. Is he a horologist? Is he a campanologist? I don't know. But he is, like Rose, he's young and attractive, and very obviously kind of set up as a kind of love interest for Scarlett. But him and her have a very fractious relationship. Things ended badly, I think, the last time. There's mention of him ending up in a Turkish jail, aeroplane style. Have you ever been in a Turkish prison kind of stuff? So he's not keen on doing any favors for Scarlett, but he is kind of brought around because he can translate Aramaic. We also meet a third person who is the kind of professional cameraman who's filming Scarlett. Everything's still handheld. And this is Benji. He's a kind of documentarian who's interested in Scarlett's research. So, in a way that I don't quite understand, we get taken to the museum in Paris, to the gravestone of Nicholas Flamel, which is a real thing, apparently. I've checked this out afterwards. I had no idea, but his real gravestone is in the museum in Paris. And by looking at maybe you guys can help me out, but my understanding was that they needed information from this Rose Key to figure out what was going on. But then they turn up, look at the gravestone, say, oh, this carving has a guy with a key on his back. Maybe the key is on the back of the gravestone. So they rip it off the wall, and then Scarlett uses her chemistry knowledge to mix a few household chemicals together, set fire to the back of the stone gravestone, which reveals new inscriptions, which make not a lot of sense, but which suggests that 370 feet below where Nicholas Flamel's tomb is where he has stored the Philosopher's Stone. Everyone with me so far? And so this leads them to discussing the catacombs of Paris, which are these famous kind of reclaimed underground quarries, which during the 18th, 19th century were used to free up some of the burial grounds in Paris, which were full to overflowing. And so millions and millions of bones were kind of disinterred from the cemeteries and stacked in interesting ways under the streets of Paris in these catacombs. So we have, thousands of femurs all stacked together. We have skulls. We have kind of crucifixes made out of various bones, all sorts of stuff. And according to the somehow the information that's been translated from the Rose Key and the information that they've discovered on the back of Flamel's tombstone, they need to go down there to find where the Philosopher's Stone is. So that's interesting. But while they're looking for access to where Flamel's tomb would be, they go on a kind of guided tour of the catacombs, which you can do, but that doesn't take them anywhere near where they need to be, and they see that the path they would need to take is kind of blocked off. And then a mysterious kid appears and suggests that they need to find Papillon, who is a caver, urban explorer, who will be able to tell them how to get to where they need to go. This kid disappears as well. And so they go to the club that Papillon is supposed to be in. They kind of walk around. They see a scary girl in a white dress who really kind of leaps out at you as being kind of quite intense looking and angry. But she disappears. They manage to find Papillon. They kind of don't really want to tell him that they're looking for the Philosopher's Stone, which is 370 feet underneath the grave of a 18th century alchemist. So they say they're looking for treasure and that Papillon can get half of it if he helps them to find it. He kind of isn't very interested, but he says, yeah, sure, I'll do it. I've got my crew. We find out that George, the horologist guy, is not keen on being underground. He doesn't really want to come, but he'll help them until they get to the cave entrance, and then he's done. And so the next day, they kind of roll up. We have Benji, who's the kind of documentarian. We have Scarlett, who's kind of in charge. We have George, who's just going to follow them for a little bit and then leave. He's done his translation. He doesn't really need to do anything else. We have Papillon, who's the caver. We have Susie, who's his girlfriend. And we have another guy whose name I can't remember. Anyone want to jump
Zed.
in? Who's the last guy?
I never know anybody's name. I don't know.
Zed.
Zed.
Yeah.
Okay. Appropriate name for the last guy we get introduced to. He's Zed. We sort of see a little bit about Papillon. He's got interesting scars on his hands, which are not explained at the time. But Papillon knows a kind of secret entrance into the catacombs, which is off the kind of tourist map. So they go and they find it's in a kind of graffiti-covered tunnel. We see that Papillon has his own kind of tag, which is very simply just Pap in a circle. And the entrance to the catacombs that they have, the secret entrance, is really cool. It's got a kind of devil's mouth around it. It's just a small ground level hole that goes in. And at this point, George is saying, right, I'm done, I'm off. But then, in quite an effective jump scare, some police come out of nowhere, tackle them to the ground, and they all kind of run into the cavern, into the catacombs to get away from the police, including George, who's not very happy. And then the kind of entrance sort of collapses behind them. And so now they're away from the police and they're stuck in the catacombs. And it's very claustrophobic. It's very creepy. It is the real catacombs. So they apparently, according to my readings, these are the first filmmakers to have access to using the catacombs as a location for a film. So it's very creepy. As they're walking around, they hear singing, which is obviously going to be super creepy when you're underground. They find lots of candles. They find that the singing is coming from naked witches, including the super intense, scary girl from the club. Earlier, we kind of recognize her intense stare. And then we kind of get to where they'd got to before in the kind of tourist bit, where they'd seen the blocked off entrance, which they want to go to get to the tomb. And there's two options. There's like a sort of semi-full of bones path, and there's an actual bricks off tunnel entrance. And Papillon wants them to go through the bone part. They think that it would be much easier to go through the blocked off tunnel, but Papillon tells them that is an evil way, that in a very kind of French kind of manner, he says that people that go through there don't come back. And he tells them the story of Le Taupe, who is the mole, how he went down there and never came back 2 years ago. And so he kind of wins out, and they go to climb over the bones to get access. Benji's not happy about this. He doesn't really, understandably, want to climb over human bones to get to where they're going. And of course, he gets stuck, and he freaks out. And the tunnel starts to collapse, and it's all crazy. But eventually they get through and they come round, and it's a bit weird. They're back where they started. Somehow, they seem to have gone in a circle, which is obviously, if the witch is singing naked in the tunnels wasn't enough to show you that this is going to get weird, going in a circle will do that. So they decide to open the, in quotes, evil tunnel and go down that way. And while they're going down there, the weirdness kind of amps up. So we see that there is Papillon graffiti on the walls, and they have an argument about, him bullshitting them and saying that he'd never been down there, but he's left his tags everywhere. So how could that be true? That's weird. Then a phone rings. Again, also super weird. You don't expect phone calls underground, and then it stops. And they come to an entrance which has I think it says Barrière d'Enfer, or maybe they just call it that, where they go through the gates of hell and they find a piano. Also very weird, underground. And George starts talking about how he had a piano when he was younger, and he used to play on it, and he'd play a tune, but one of the keys was flat. And so, I mean, George isn't the sharpest, I don't think, despite being, smart enough to work on Notre Dame. So he decides to play this piano, and of course, it has a kind of missing key, exactly the same spot as the one he had as a kid. The phone rings again. They're wandering around in the kind of semi-dark of these tunnels. They find the phone, and Scarlet picks it up, and the voice on the other end knows that it's Scarlet and talks to her, which is also very creepy. And then out of nowhere, Le Taupe appears, the mole. He just sort of turns up, and he kind of has a discussion with him. They've not seen him for 2 years, Papillon and his crew, but he says they're looking to get out. So they decide to follow the mole. Obviously, he's been there for 2 years, so he knows how to get out of this place. I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
But he's weird. Like, there's something not right about him. It's not like you just ran into him.
No. If you haven't trigged at this point, he's not one of the living, I think, at the very least.
Yes.
He also says that they shouldn't be here, and that the only way out is down. So he's kind of spouting a whole bunch of very Gnostic information on them, which they just have no choice really but to follow. They follow his advice that the only way out is down, so they go down a well. Benji falls. They hear kind of more weird sounds and darkness. They see a small boy wandering around, and Papillon says that the mole is different. So obviously they're slow, but they're catching on to the fact that things are very weird down here. And the mole leads them to a kind of dead end, which has a pillar with a vulture on it, which points to a scarab. And this somehow is supposed to be some kind of riddle. They kind of liken it to Egyptian tombs where the secret exit, you had to touch a stone, but if you touched the wrong one, the whole thing would collapse. So they managed to solve this riddle in about 2 minutes. Scarlet moves a particular stone, which leads to a tunnel opening. And then when they go through this tunnel, they find the tomb and the body of Nicholas Flamel, which is totally uncorrupted. It's there looking as fresh as a daisy. It hasn't rotted. Everything is a bit weird. But there's no Philosopher's Stone. They can't see any treasure. Nothing really makes sense. And then I think Scarlet comes up with some kind of bullshit about how they need to turn off the light to something in the darkness. Anyway, everyone turns off their lamps, and they see that there's light coming from under the water, which is on the bottom of Flamel's tomb. So Scarlet decides that the most obvious thing to do would be to go in the water of this manky old man's tomb underground with 6 million dead people's bones, and find the source of the light, which is in a different room. And when she gets through there, she sees that there's lots of gold and treasure, which is great. George goes through next, and a fire, yes. And then everyone kind of comes through. The cavers, so Papillon, Susie, and Zed are interested in the treasure. Scarlet's interested in a big mural, Egyptian style, which is on this wall. And she talks some rubbish about ancient Egyptian myths. But the fresco she is able to work out actually has the Philosopher's Stone in it. Where the moon is a piece of rock, which is the Philosopher's Stone. So she immediately hacks it out to stick in her bag, as you do. She went to the Indiana Jones School of Archaeology, clearly. Uh, but while they're doing this, they're not paying attention to the bloody French people who somehow managed to, like in Aladdin's cave, they touch the treasure, and that sets things to collapsing. And so things start to collapse, and they kind of just make it out in time. Susie gets squashed, but she's sort of okay. The mole has disappeared. Susie's arm is knackered, and so Scarlet uses the Philosopher's Stone on her kind of broken arm, and it fixes immediately, which is very interesting. So she's now being cured. They've got the Philosopher's Stone. They just need to escape, and they find a hole in the floor, which they then talk about how in alchemical kind of theory, as above, so below, that everything's mirror images of everything else. Blah blah blah. They find another entrance which says, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," which is famously the inscription above the gates of hell in Dante's Inferno. And so they go through this, and they find that they're now back in the treasure room that they'd been in before, except everything's upside down. Like the frescoes and the murals are upside down. So again, we've got this weird kind of messing with perception that's going on. So, well, now what do? Do they kind of just do everything they did before in reverse? So Papillon goes through the water, and they get back to the Flamel tomb, but things are also weirdly different there as well. So the body of Flamel is kind of a bit rotten now, whereas before it had been perfectly preserved. The mole is there. He disappeared, but now he's reappeared. But he's extra creepy. He was creepy before, but now he's extra creepy, just standing in the corner.
Yeah.
Susie approaches the mole, and he kills her. He kind of basically sort of whacks her in the face, and she falls over and cracks her head open. And so, Scarlet with the Philosopher's Stone decides to give it another shot, but now it's not working. Something's stopping it from working, and Susie is dead. So that's not great. There's lots of weird noises around. Everything is kind of opposite. I think at this point, Scarlet works out that she has the false Philosopher's Stone, that she now has to kind of retrace her steps. Or is that later on?
I think this is where they start to figure it out.
Yeah, no, it's later on. They're kind of, yeah. So they don't know what's going on, so they just keep kind of doing things in reverse to how they got there. They leave Benji on his own as they kind of go forward to explore. We see sort of a creepy person just spookily kind of walk past him that he doesn't see behind, and then we see Benji fall down the well that they've just travelled down, face first, dead. So that's two casualties already now. That's not good. People start to hallucinate. So George sees his dead brother in the water of the tunnels. More weird noises. Papillon sees a burning car with a person inside. This is I think the explanation of Papillon's scars that we got introduced before. That there'd been some occasion where he'd left a friend to die in a burning car because he'd been unable to save him. And also this weird burning car with the person inside. The person inside is the mysterious person who told Scarlet to go and find Papillon right at the beginning of the film. So, I mean, there's some really quite cool scares here. Like the person in the burning car that's underground kind of grabs Papillon, and then the whole thing just implodes and leaves him sort of stuck upside down in the floor of the tunnel.
Yeah.
And he's dead. I mean, that's it. You're not coming back from that.
But he knew him. He said, "It's not my fault." So it's like he was in the car accident, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of his sins from the past. This is kind of what we're slowly kind of reaching to, is that, you know, people are hallucinating or being shown visions from their past where they didn't behave as they should have. So that's what seems to be going on here, especially with George seeing his brother who died in a kind of caving accident. We also see, I mean, obviously they decide we need to keep going. Let's not hang around this weird place where a spectral burning car appeared and buried our friend in the ground. And we have a little bit more kind of, we have a heartfelt moment between George and Scarlet, who says that the week in Turkey was the best of his life. Now, I assumed he was meaning the time he spent with Scarlet. Maybe he meant the time he spent in the Turkish jail. It's not made super clear.
No.
It could be either. We'll have to see. And so they're kind of keep on going through the tunnels. They see a really odd, creepy person sitting in a chair with his back to them, super tall, wearing robes with a hood. There's faces on the wall of the damned. We're kind of realizing at this point. The person gets out of the chair. The people on the wall sort of come back to life, and now they attack George to basically rip his throat open. And Scarlet tries to use the Philosopher's Stone again, but it's not working. And then she has the realization that actually what she has is the false Philosopher's Stone, not the real one. The false Philosopher's Stone will only work once, which is the one that worked with Susie. So now she has to go back again to the mirror image that they're in just now to find the real stone. So they have to go right back to the beginning to get the real stone to help save George. So now there is a bit of time pressure on her. And things are kind of getting crazier and crazier. So the water that's in the tunnels starts turning to blood. There's the people that were in the walls start coming alive and chasing after her. She kind of knocks them out of the way. She kind of gets there, and then she sees the hanging man that we saw at the beginning of the film that was in the tunnels in Iran. And this turns out to be her father. This is one of her sins from the past, that he was having a kind of mental health crisis and tried to phone her, and she was too busy to speak to him. So, it reminded me a bit in some ways of Flatliners. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that film. The idea that, as you approach death or as you approach the afterlife, you have to atone for the sins of the past. So that's her kind of sin, was not being present for her father when he needed her. But she kind of hugs his hanging body and apologizes, and that seems to be good enough. She gets back to the original mirror image tomb where they started off. Again, gouges out the hopefully the real Philosopher's Stone, and then has to kind of make her way back to George, which she does in time to get the stone bits onto him to kind of revive him, but that doesn't work. And so now she has another realization from some of the alchemical text of Flamel that basically the power was within you the whole time, which is, the real treasure was the friends we made along the way, apart from the three that are dead, and that they've left in the tunnels. And so this leads her to giving George a kind of Snow White style kiss, which brings him back to life, and his wounds disappear. But they're still being chased. There's like the witches and weird people that are kind of chasing after them. And so they keep going until they get to what looks like a well, but it has a kind of manhole cover on it. And they can't lift it out. They have to kind of push this manhole cover down, which is weird. And it's actually really well done, that part. It's super creepy. They have to push this manhole cover down. And then we see that, part of the theme of the whole film has been inversions and circularity and mirror images. And once they push the manhole down, they see that there's like an inverted Paris underneath. And so the world is kind of upside down. And so they have to climb down and essentially appear in this upside down Paris, which is, I guess they escape. And so they get out, and then the kind of camera inverts again. So now they appear the right way up. They're in Paris beside the Seine, and they put the manhole cover back on. And then they kind of say, oh, well, we've made it. Zed buggers off immediately, as any rational person would.
I respect that, though. He was like, I never want to see you again. I don't want to see your faces. I forget your names.
100%. It's like, two of my best friends are dead down there. I saw one of them disappear into a car that was on fire underground. I saw one being killed by a dead person. I'm out of here. See yous. And then Scarlet and George are kind of left hugging together. And, nobody's learned anything. They didn't get the Philosopher's Stone. They've kind of left a whole bunch of collapsed tunnels underground. Like, everything's just wrecked. And then we get...
also, are they actually in Paris, or are they in some upside down opposite world Paris?
Yes, absolutely. That is a question which, it's not really answered. It looks like there's a little vignette at the end where Scarlett's talking to an interviewer again. I think this is supposed to be after the fact. So in the upside down world that they're in, and everything seems fairly normal, but the interviewer is asking her what was going on, what happened, and then her kind of very kind of cliched answer after having destroyed, it seems like miles of catacomb tunnel, is that, yeah, we were searching for the truth. That's what we wanted to find. It wasn't treasure, it was the truth.
Truth of what?
Yeah, that we're absolutely crazy.
I assumed that was from previous, because it was from when Benji was interviewing her before, and it was just sort of really prescient for her to say that, because she was searching for the Philosopher's Stone for like her whole life anyway, so since they actually found it, they can apply that after the fact, and it has more meaning that way. Yeah,
it wasn't made very clear. I mean, that's a problem with having Benji off camera. It's that, you know, you don't get a feel that it's him, or that it's from earlier in the film. But yeah, I think Kim's idea that they're now stuck in kind of bizarro Paris would be quite interesting. That they've kind of traveled through hell and come out in an alternative world would be pretty cool.
There's no cheese. There's no wine. Like,
yeah,
it's just
that would be bizarro France.
Everything is
they eat
everything is
beans.
Just McDonald's and Starbucks. Yeah.
They have a reputation as terrible lovers. It's all just gone wrong.
So part of the key to understanding this movie is that it's based on Dante's Divine Comedy. Are either of you familiar with that?
Yeah.
It's just the circles of hell type thing, right?
Yeah, I'm not particularly familiar with it, but essentially they're going through the 9 circles of hell, and to get out they have to atone for their sins, and then apparently at the end of the Inferno, to get out of hell, he has to literally climb down Satan and crawl through his belly button, I think, from what I've read, because I haven't read this poem.
Gross. Satan's belly button? I would just stay in hell. Like, if someone was like, this is how you get out, I'd be like, you know what, it's fine here.
Just like,
it's not that bad.
Like crawling through mountains of fluff. That's just...
But apparently when he gets out of hell through Satan's belly button, he comes through inverted again, just like it happens in the movie. So I don't think that in the Divine Comedy he ends up in a parallel world. I think that he just ends up inverted, and that's how he gets out. So I didn't read that it was implied that they're in a parallel Paris. They just came out upside down because everything is twisted around.
But they weren't really atoning for their sins. They were atoning for what they thought were their sins, right?
Well, yeah.
Because him not saving his brother was not his sin. That's not his fault. He was a child too.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened with the car. That might have been his fault. Her not answering her dad's phone call, that's not a sin. If it had been sins, she would have had to watch herself wreck all of the archaeological artifacts. Right? Like that's what it would have been.
Yeah, that's a big sin. That's a much bigger sin.
Yeah, that's the way bigger sin. Yeah.
This is something I really didn't like about the movie, is that it is implying that it was a sin for her to not answer the phone, which is like...
Yeah.
It's a terrible way to frame like survivors of suicide, because one of the things that happens in cases of that is you end up with a lot of guilt, and you feel you go through the things you could have done or you could have seen beforehand, and like the way to deal with that is to get through it and understand it's not your fault. People make their own decisions, but the movie implies that it's a sin that she did that, right?
Yeah.
Well, and also that for George, that when he was 10 and couldn't save his 5-year-old brother from drowning, that was also somehow his fault, right? That's not a sin either.
Yeah, and
that's
exactly.
Horrible.
And what he says is he went to get help, but he got lost, and like he did everything he could, and also he was a child. So again, it's not a sin.
No.
We're coming at this from a very kind of Presbyterian viewpoint, I feel.
Yeah.
Like this film is very Catholic in that doesn't matter. You're still going to feel guilty for it, and it's still your fault.
I guess.
One of the more gracious ways to interpret it, and again, not being a Catholic and not having read Dante's Inferno, but from my limited amount of research beforehand, according to Dante, there's 3 different types of sins, and one of them is incontinence, which is like a lack of willpower or something like that. So we can interpret that their sin is not her sin is not that she didn't answer the phone and her father killed himself, but it's that she didn't have she was too weak of a person to manage her relationships properly, and she atones for that by coming to terms with it and directly addressing her father the second time she sees him hanging, and basically, confronting it directly rather than avoiding it, which, again, doesn't really feel like that much of a sin to me, but maybe it's a little bit more of a gracious interpretation.
Yeah. I'm sure if we asked any theologians, they'll be able to tell us that there's lots of sins there.
Yeah, the thing about this movie is that it's very dense in history and theology and like alchemy and like numerology and all kinds of stuff that I don't have expertise in. So maybe let's start with the archaeology, and we can explain why she's not a good archaeologist and explain everything she does wrong archaeologically.
I think, Kim, you have to answer this one.
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, she's not an archaeologist. She's a treasure hunter, and she's not a grave robber. Well, I guess so, because that was kind of the guy's tomb. So she robs some graves and just destroys things. And at no point in time does she take pictures or notes or interprets anything. And she is after the power of the stone. She's not after the history or the knowledge or any of that, right? Like all of this really cool stuff. An actual archaeologist would be like, yeah, that's the stone. That's really cool. But look at how they put together this tomb. Like, look at the foundations and look at, that's the interesting stuff. So absolutely. I don't know. She's just not an archaeologist.
A real archaeologist would have stopped at the bit with the pillar and the carved vulture and scarab and spent the next year and a half.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Totally.
Taking notes and doing 3D photogrammetry and things like that of it.
Yeah, and doing everything that she can to protect it and preserve it. Yeah, it's just that same old thing. And she calls herself an urban archaeologist at the beginning, which also doesn't really line up, except for she might be an urban archaeologist just in the fact that the treasure she wants to steal happens to be in Paris. Right? Like that's how she's an urban archaeologist.
Yeah, she says she has a PhD in urban archaeology, a master's in chemistry, and a PhD in symbology.
Doesn't, what's his face, and Dan Brown, doesn't he also have a PhD in symbology? They would get along well, I feel.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels between this movie and
every other movie.
the Da Vinci Code, that series. Yeah, a PhD in symbology is not a real thing. You can't get a PhD or any degree in symbology. There's a lot of articles, particularly after the Da Vinci Code, explaining how Harvard does not have a symbology department. Symbology is not really a field of its own. There's a lot of different fields that interpret symbols in different ways. Like he could have been a professor of religious iconography. Linguistics or linguistic anthropology would use symbols. There's a field called semiotics, which is the study of essentially how symbolic meaning is applied to things. I can't remember. I did study semiotics in my undergrad, but it's been a long time. But symbology itself is like the implication when you have Tom Hanks being a symbologist or Scarlett in this movie being a symbologist. It also says she speaks 4 languages and 2 dead languages. And I think there's this idea among the public that if you're a professor in symbology, you just memorize every symbol that you've ever seen and you know what every symbol means. And also, because language is made up of symbols, you're just really good at learning languages. And like, that's not really how it works. Like, if you're a linguist, that you don't necessarily know a lot of languages. You know how the structure of languages works, but that doesn't necessarily mean you speak or are fluent in a lot of languages, right?
Yeah, usually just one, and that's your specialty.
Yeah. And probably someone who had a degree in symbols, if it existed, would probably just be an expert on a single symbol, right? Took them their entire education to figure it out or study it. They have a book on it, and
Yeah, there's, if you were studying the nature of symbols, you would be into like cognition, psychology, like how human minds understand symbols rather than just understanding symbols themselves. Or if, again, like if you're a professor of religious iconography, then you would be specializing in knowing what symbols mean, but a specific subtype of symbols related to something specific, like, for example, Christianity, right?
Yeah.
There just really isn't a person that would know every symbol in the world and what they mean. That's just not really a thing that can be done, right?
Yeah, I find there's a lot of kind of overlap with some of the ideas in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. You have kind of search for something, the treasure's found, but it's rendered worthless and left behind. That kind of thing. I mean, these are kind of fairly common tropes. I thought the film, as I was saying to Kim earlier, I thought the film was efficient. It had, obviously these people had done a lot of research. They'd found some really cool ideas, some really cool locations. I mean, the really filming in the underground catacombs is a really great coup for the film, and it acts as kind of an extra character in the film. It has its own kind of presence and atmosphere. But yeah, it's efficient. There are some good scares in it. It's sort of, but it's a film by numbers. It's just like, the people don't really, they're not really believable in terms of characters, because they do just things that people in films would do, which is keep going forward, not pay any attention to what they're actually doing, not take any notes, that kind of stuff.
They're also not even in particular very likable.
No.
So Scarlett, for example, like, she's very set on what she wants. She doesn't care who gets hurt or what happens, right?
Yeah.
And even in like, so when the first girl died, her friends were really upset, and it was Scarlett, the first one, that said, "She's dead. We got to move on. Like, leave it. Get over it. Let's go." And then when Benji died, she kind of did the same, like, whatever, let's keep going. And then when George got hurt, all of a sudden she was like, let's sit down and think about this and figure out why this stone's not working, and then try and fix it. Like, when it was her boyfriend, all of a sudden then it was something worth putting effort into, right?
Yeah. And I think she's supposed to be sympathetic, but she doesn't really come across as very sympathetic.
No, she doesn't.
Yeah, in all her kind of grave robbing and looting and smashing, you're supposed to like her, but not really.
No.
George is quite likable. I feel he's kind of, he didn't even want to be there. He wasn't even supposed to be there. He kind of gets dragged along for the ride. I guess.
Oh, that's the other thing too, is that, like, the cop just came out of nowhere from the dark and ninja tackled them out of nowhere. Like, cops do not do that for
that's how
people
they do
sneaking
in France,
into
man.
the
That's
catacombs.
how they do.
Like, that was crazy.
But there's not really an awful lot of archaeology in this film, I don't think, apart from the neat views of the catacombs. Has anyone been there? Anyone been to the catacombs?
Yeah.
You been?
Yeah. Cool. I mean, I stayed on the tourist route. I didn't.
You didn't climb over bones and find a tomb?
A mountain of bones. No. The thing is too, is that, like, if any of those femora had been broken, that's like a knife that could have, like, it would not have been comfortable also to climb over those bones.
Yeah, risk of plague quite high, I'd imagine, as well.
I don't know. I think down there everything's pretty dry, and I think most things would be dead at that point. Like, you probably don't even have spiders down there, really, right? Everything's just kind of dry, I think.
Okay. I'd be very surprised if there wasn't spiders.
It's also... Well, but you need flies and stuff. Like, you need it.
Yeah, but there'll be wood lice, and I mean, it had running water in it, so there's probably all sorts of things.
Maybe.
Is there running water in the real
one? Where I
was
seemed very dry.
Okay.
Well, you only go to parts of it, right? Like, they take you on a very specific route. It's beautiful and very cool, but and then it's also just the like the ethics, being a bioarchaeologist, the ethics of how they treated the bones. You're just like, oh, so sad. That's not how you treat human remains.
Here's a question I don't know if we have an answer to, but Ross, as you said, this was the first movie that got permission to actually film in the catacombs. So certainly when you're seeing the bones, like, piled up against the wall, those are real human bones in the movie. They are crawling through a tunnel, climbing over top of a whole bunch of human femurs. Those couldn't have been real bones that they were climbing over for the movie, right?
I'm hoping. They looked very realistic, but
they looked very real, but casts and stuff now do look very real. Like, they're getting better and better, right? And it just it all depends on the lighting and stuff too. And the lighting, even down there, the lighting's not very great, even in the tourist area, but they try and keep it creepy too, right? So the right type of paint or cast, and then the right type of lighting.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well. When you see kind of Benji crawling over them and getting stuck, they kind of look and sound like if anyone's sort of knows the sound of bones kind of rattling
definitely
against
sounds
each other.
Like bone on bone. Yeah.
So I'm hoping that they were just very good at the special effects and they weren't, needlessly damaging what is a interesting cultural and archaeological place.
Hopefully.
I imagine the insurance would not allow it. Like you say, Kim, if you broke them and they jabbed into you, that's going to be a hell of a lawsuit from the actor to the film company. I got stabbed by a broken femur on set, and now I have
bone
now I have
shards
tuberculosis, and it's your fault. But yeah, I mean, there's not an awful lot of archaeology on display apart from the sort of stacked bones, which was a whole thing. Like you were saying, not really very respectful.
She's also at an archaeological site doing that documentary, right, with the people behind her. So the idea is that it kind of seemed like she was leading the site, the excavation or something, even though she's very young, but I guess she has 3 PhDs, so she's not that young.
Yeah.
It did look like a real archaeological site. It seemed what you could see in the background. They had I think like a total station set up. They had just people sort of moving around, documenting things
awkwardly, like real archaeologists.
Yep.
But, they might have had one, right? And it may not have even been in Paris. It could have been at any major city in Europe. They just took advantage of urban archaeological excavation happening. But yes, I mean, an archaeologist wouldn't have done anything that she did.
Even just an ethical human probably wouldn't have done most of the things that she did.
Yeah.
But it's weird that the catacombs have all these kind of stylized art kind of made out of bones, don't they? There's the kind of crucifixes and skulls and rows and stuff. And this was a whole kind of thing that was done. I went to Prague on holiday like 20 years ago now, but we went to a place called the Sedlik Ossuary, which is just outside of Prague. Unfortunately, it was closed when we got there after having spent like an hour on the train to get there. But it's famous for sort of similar things. So it's got thousands of bones that have been turned into chandeliers, into kind of artworks. The guy that did it, the guy that basically kind of took all the bones and kind of turned them into an interior designer's nightmare. He signed his name with bones. So he's like taken various bones and spelled out his name in human bones on the side of this church as well. So, I mean, I guess it also shows how much our attitudes to kind of human remains have changed and are plastic, and that, we kind of feel that we're very respectful now, but 100 years down the line, that's almost certainly going to have changed.
But maybe making them into beautiful artwork, maybe that was seen as respectful then too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a church in Faro, Portugal, that is just a really small room, and the entire walls are covered in human bones, but it's all arranged like patterns again, like the distal condyles of the femora all arranged so it looks like wallpaper, and then one row of skulls facing out, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's the way that they've done it feels also strangely very respectful, because it was done in such a aesthetically pleasing beautiful way.
Yeah,
but if someone did it if someone did it now, I'd probably be like, what the right? But I guess because it's old, you get that distance from it, and then it seems okay.
I think there's worse things for your bones to end up as in a work of art, I guess.
Oh yeah, totally. Something that has been around for, I don't know how old that church is, but for a long time, so people are coming in and finding solace in it, finding comfort in it, finding beauty in it. That's okay, right?
Yeah, certainly I think it's very effective as a memento mori. It's hard not to contemplate your own mortality when you're surrounded by thousands of human bones in the shape of a chandelier.
Right, yeah. And also, skeletons don't need to be scary.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Halloween prop and stuff, but they're not scary. All animal skeletons are beautiful. Humans are as well. I remember I was in the bone room in the Berlin Natural History Museum. So they have this room that's just full of dinosaur bones. And I was allowed to just go in there and just check, like just explore. It was so cool. And then I was in there just doing my nerd thing. And then this group of artists came in. They had arranged also like a similar thing. So they came in and I was just, looking at the bones the way that, someone who's interested in paleontology would. And then, but they were looking at it. So they had no idea what they were looking at. But the way that they were describing it, they were like, oh, look at this, they'd pick up like a skull or something. And they'd be like the Gothic, renderings of this, whatever. And the way that they're describing it, like at first I was annoyed because I was like, why? You're just ruining my nerd sanctum here. And then I listened to them and I was like, the way that they're seeing it is so different than the way that I saw it. And they really saw a different type of beauty in the bones. Like I see an anatomical evolutionary beauty, but they saw an aesthetically like a design beauty. And it's really interesting. And then the drawings that they did of them, what they picked out from the skulls or from the bones is very different than what I would have picked out. Mm. Yeah, it's interesting.
Interesting.
It's the best room in the whole world.
Have you been to, either of you guys been to the, is it the Gallery of Vertebrate Evolution in the Natural History Museum in Paris?
No.
Because that's also just like a
no,
big...
but I think we saw it on Adele Blanc-Sec.
Yeah, that's
right.
And it's also beautiful, just kind of Victorian cast iron wooden floors with just the skeletons on display. Old school style. It's just, here they are. Enjoy them. There's something to be said
beautiful.
For that.
I think with human remains is it has to come from respect. So that's what I teach my students in my lab. It's, no social media, like no pictures on social media, nothing like that, unless it's for education and promoting science. Yeah. Because I don't believe in saying absolutely none, because again, that takes human skeletal anatomy. It takes, archaeology and all that stuff, puts it into the shadows. Like human skeleton is scary or sacred and you can't show it. You have to be obviously aware of the population that's from and the beliefs of the descendant communities and take that into account. But if all of that is fine, then I think it's okay to promote education, science outreach, all that with it. But there has to be that intent with it, right? Mm-hmm. So it has a lot to do with intent.
Yeah.
So I think those people making those beautiful artworks were intending something respectful, right? But like Ed Gein making his nipple belt was not really his intent. His intent was
certainly.
Not good.
Certainly. Yeah. And I guess there's also the aspect that of, with a lot of the teaching material, I guess, that you guys handle, it's stuff that's been donated by, the owners of those bones. They wanted them to end up in study for science or whatever. Similarly with the people certainly in the Czech ossuary, they wanted their bodies to be with the church. And so the fact that they're dug up and used to make chandeliers and signatures and stuff is at least partly honoring their request to be buried where they wanted to be buried.
Yeah, exactly. And they've become part of the church and part of the I'm forgetting the word of what you do at churches.
Worship.
Yeah, right?
We're not doing
I'm such
our
a
reputation
heathen.
as heathen atheistic scientists any favors here, are we?
It's hard to learn about churches because your skin starts to burn when you walk inside, so you can't spend that much time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I liked it. I thought that it was a fun film. It was at one time's play speed all the way through.
Yeah, I watched it one time too. It was one of the rarer ones that I didn't hate. I wasn't cursing anybody's name, Josh.
One thing we can touch on a little bit is like the alchemy and the Philosopher's Stone and Nicholas Flamel. This is all a historical thing, which is used as a MacGuffin in the movie. But I'm not a Harry Potter fan, so I'm not too familiar with Nicholas Flamel from that property. But Nicholas Flamel was a real guy, and reading up on him, apparently all of his associations with alchemy and the search for Philosopher's Stone seem to be posthumous. They seem to originate about 200 years after his death. He was just like a scribe and a manuscript seller. And then I guess in later reproductions of his work or something like that, people added like a foreword that's like, oh yeah, also he was searching for the Philosopher's Stone or something like that. And then it's all like basically fan fiction afterwards.
Yeah.
Could you imagine coming back to life for whatever reason happens? You get brought back to life, like a Bill and Ted type of thing or something. You come into the future and you find out that this is what you're known for. And you're like, what? I've never even heard of this.
I'd be straight down to the offices of my nearest lawyers for a slice of that royalty pie. I mean, from this film and also from the Harry Potter franchise.
Harry Potter. Oh yeah.
Show me the green. Yeah, because it'd be like if somebody decided that, I don't know, Washington. He was the first president of the US, but he also invented the laser and figured out quantum mechanics. That's the kind of equivalent of what they've done to this poor guy who was just a scribe.
But like with AI stuff, when you Google things now, like that could come up now. You've said it, this is going to go online. Now this is part of the record. Yeah. Ross, you've just messed up so many high school students' final exams.
Oh, okay. Here's something that I wanted to mention. They read a poem, right? She gets this rose key, which translates something into something that she doesn't read Aramaic, so she has to take it to George. George reads Aramaic. They read this poem, and the poem is: "Winged vulture leads the way with brightest light and darkest day. Underneath the heavens reign. What is lost shall be regained. Halfway twixt the darkest gate, and this tablet laid atop a paired fate." Rhyming in English, we've seen this in other movies. I'm thinking of Disney's Atlantis, where
right, yeah.
I can't remember. It was the place they were looking for was Iceland, but they had they mixed up Iceland and Ireland in the translation because like both of them started with I and they had the wrong letter or something like that. But like that's not how translations work. If she was a symbologist and she understood 6 languages, she would know that languages don't rhyme when they're translated. So it was super silly to me that they had a rhyming poem when it was translated.
Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to be gracious as before, you could say that this guy was such a good translator that he was able to transpose it into a kind of rhyming scheme as well. Because I mean, that's what translators
on
sometimes
the fly without any editing
of poetry sometimes have to do. But yeah, I mean, if it's a mystical riddle kind of poem, then it has to be exact, or else you won't get the meaning. And if it's got to be exact, then it's not going to rhyme.
No. Also, I don't get the meaning of any of that, even in English.
Yeah, and it doesn't really have anything to do with anything. It doesn't matter. Like all the information they need is on the back of his gravestone, which they burn to get the secret message.
Yeah.
Like I can't see at what point the rose key was of any relevance to anything.
I think that they used this riddle to find out that the tomb was exactly 370.5 feet below the gravestone.
But how?
Okay, let me walk you through this, and let me also explain to you one of the things about this movie that made me uncomfortable is how short a step it is from trying to figure out what the movie is talking about to pseudo-archaeology, QAnon radicalization, okay?
All right, let me just prepare myself for this, okay?
And you know what? I think this is what this hashtag Real Archaeology event is all about, because Graham Hancock's second season of his show is coming out tomorrow as we are recording this, and about a week before this event. And of course, Flint Dibble has been really involved in, we covered his debate with Graham Hancock on Joe Rogan. Really outspoken against pseudo-archaeology and the harms it causes. And this is something that's been escalating in the last few years. So back in 2014, we've done other movies from this time period, Roland Emmerich stuff. This is in the early days of Ancient Aliens, where this stuff seems really harmless. But in retrospect now, we can see how, the way YouTube algorithms work, this is the kind of thing that could lead you directly into radicalization. Okay, so first of all, the whole concept of like the world the world exists in a way that people leave breadcrumbs for you to sort stuff out. That's a big QAnon thing, right? The evil people are doing evil stuff and keeping it secret, but they're leaving clues. And if you're smart, you can figure out their clues, which doesn't make any sense. Why would you leave clues to your evil deeds, right? And so just this whole idea that the movie is based on you can solve riddles and you can figure things out, and that's what archaeologists do. But in reality, archaeologists are never, ever solving riddles. I can't think of a single case where an archaeologist used a riddle to find an archaeological site. There's a few examples where we are looking for lost things that we know exist, but even that isn't usually how archaeology is done, right? I'm thinking of when Heinrich Schliemann found the city of Troy. Sometimes like shipwrecks, we know the ship went down, but we don't know where they are. Yeah. But more often you're finding stuff and you don't know what it is and you're trying to figure out what it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they have this like whole solving riddles and following clues, very much like Da Vinci Code. Futurama lampooned this really well on their episode called the Da Vinci Code, where they're following clues. They're standing at a statue of Neptune and trying to figure out where to go next. And the professor's like, his trident has 3 points, or Trey. The U in his name looks like a V. And then they're like, Trevi. We have to go to the Trevi fountain. It could be nothing else. And like, that's nonsense, right? Like, that's what so much of the riddles are like here, Kim. Like, you're like, you couldn't figure out these riddles. And like, yeah, you could interpret these in 1,000 different ways, but they get it exactly right the first time, every time, right? And like, in the past, this felt like a kind of innocent thing, like a little fun treasure hunt. Today, it just feels like QAnon supporters following breadcrumbs, taking every little bit of evidence and interpreting it in the way that fits best in their theory, even though it's crazy and tenuous and there's
not even evidence. It's just random happenstance.
There's not even evidence, yeah. It's your mind is twisting things into the way that fits your narrative, and the narrative is already established beforehand, right?
Yeah, and then you write books and get your show on Discovery Channel and Netflix specials and...
Yeah, so let me walk you down the path of my radicalization based on this movie in literally one step, okay? They determine that it's... Okay, so the poem says, halfway twixt the darkest gate and this tablet laid atop a paired fate, okay? The darkest gate is the gate of hell, and it's halfway between the grave and hell. And she says, well, alchemists believe that the number of the devil is 741. Therefore, halfway between this grave, the surface of the earth, and the darkest gate, the gate of hell, 741, is 370.5 feet, which is exactly the depth they have to go to beneath the grave. And so my thought is, okay, I thought the number of the beast was 666, so I had to look up 741, the number of the devil. And I didn't find a whole lot when I did that, but what I did find first hit on YouTube is a post from r/superstonk, where there's some guy trying to decode, because according to the text of his own post, we all know we're living in a simulation, right? So he's trying to decode the simulation and figure out the nature of the reality, right? He is citing for the number of the devil, 741, a book by Manly P. Hall called The Secret Teachings of All Ages from, I think, 1928. And this, I can't find a lot of information about it, but it seems to be some sort of Freemason book. And I also don't know where the number 741 comes from, but this is where it's coming from. So I go from one step. Scarlett says the number, alchemists believe the number of the devil is 741. I Google the devil 741. I get Super Stonks, and then I get an old Freemason book. And the guy on Super Stonks is using it to demonstrate, or using it to decode the simulation that we're all living in. And that's one step away from the QAnon map, which is, again, one of the things I get the feeling from the movie. I get this uncomfortable, like, oh, this feels like QAnon adjacent stuff. And then once I search for it, I'm immediately led into the QAnon pipeline. So that's one of the things about the movie that at the time, you can't necessarily fault the movie for it, but 10 years later, feels very uncomfortable to me.
Do you think in the same way that we talk about like Plato and stuff, someone, 500 years from now is going to be like, and super stomp stated.
Absolutely. This is the reality of our world. Elon Musk becomes a mythical heroic figure. Like 4chan is going to be like a historical document,
Yeah, like the Necronomicon.
Yeah, exactly like that, right? The archives of the old internet are going to be, the foundation for new religious movements in the future. I mean, they are now. QAnon is a religious movement now, so it's already that the internet is I
feel like Dan Brown has to accept a lot of blame for this, because it definitely feels like it all stems from the Da Vinci Code. This
feels
idea.
Like it started there. So when I was working at a bookstore when the movie came out, the first one, and people would come in and ask, like they'd go to the religion section and then they wouldn't be able to find the book. And then so they'd come in and they'd ask where Da Vinci Code was. So you take them to fiction and they're like, no, this is not in the right area. It's supposed to be in religious studies. And you're like, no, it's a fiction. It's written by Dan Brown, author of, what is it? Portrait of Solitude or something like that. Like all his other paperback books there. They would get so angry and huff and then leave, and they wouldn't even buy the book. It's happened numerous times.
Wow.
They'd never read it before. They came in thinking it was like a historical text, but not having opened it and realized it's a fictional narrative. It's written in a narrative style.
Yep. So they thought it was real.
I guess it's not just Dan Brown. It goes deeper. You have the kind of Holy Blood, Holy Grail stuff, which is what Dan Brown cribbed to make the Da Vinci Code. And then you've got, your Velikovsky and your Eric von Daniken. And then right back to the sort of stuff that you're talking about, or that Super Stonks was talking about, the kind of, revealed masters and theosophy and all that kind of
Blavatsky.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff as well. I mean, there's, Barnum had it right when he said you'll never lose money from underestimating the stupidity of the public. There's always going to be a market for it.
H.P. Lovecraft was writing like cosmic horror fiction, and people would send him letters being like, is this real? How do you know this? And like, he was an atheist.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the Mountains of Madness, like he talks about, secret archaeology in Antarctica, and people even today are talking about, secret pyramids and all that kind of bullshit in Antarctica.
I mean, look at Scientology. The only difference is that Ron Hubbard or whatever his name was went, yeah, it is. I did mean it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a question of like responsibility when you're creating fiction and entertainment, because we can see this all throughout history. Like, people believed Lovecraft stuff was real, even though he never made any claim that it was real at all. And actually said people are stupid for thinking it's real. But like this movie, Roland Emmerich stuff that we've covered, which we can see how all this stuff has built up to the situation we have related to pseudo-archaeology and how that ties into QAnon now. And we can retrospectively say, I can see how this contributed to it, but how much responsibility do you have in the moment when you're creating fiction to think about all the possibilities about how it could be misinterpreted or misused in the future?
Yeah.
I guess. And then you could even say that it's actually the responsibility is on us to make our material more accessible and interesting. Right? Like, to counteract it.
Maybe, but I think, you can't make the truth more interesting to somebody who doesn't give a shit in the first place about what's true and what's not. I mean, you either find the truth interesting or you don't. And if you don't, then anything's game. And I guess we're lucky enough that we've been educated in a certain way that we think that it matters, and that we'd like to approach it in some form. And like, we don't see it as a joke.
That's true. You had that really good quote in that Yeti paper for art when you were interviewed for that Yeti bear DNA hair thing. What did you say? Something like, a good story is never going to be ruined by something as boring as the truth, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there is a lot of that around at the moment.
Well, This hashtag Real Archaeology event organized by Flint Dibble and others is seeking to address some of these problems by amplifying all different kinds of archaeology content creators. And so, like I said, if you're new to the podcast and you like this kind of content, subscribe to us. If we can get our numbers up, then we can get more people listening to real archaeology content. Check out the list of people, of content creators participating at real-archaeology.com. Listen to their stuff, subscribe to them. We, as archaeologists trying to put out real information, don't have a son who is the head of nonfiction programming at Netflix, such as, you know, some pseudo-archaeologists who have famous programs do. So, you know, it's hard for us to get our voices out there when our job is doing archaeology. Our job isn't creating, you know, we're not necessarily trained in creating content or marketing it. So, yeah, so listen to real archaeology stuff and share it with your friends. Let everybody know about it if you want to hear more stuff like this.
Yep, and give us 5-star review if you liked us. If you didn't like us, don't review it at all.
You know what? Give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Give us a thumbs up or thumbs down on YouTube, because nobody sees the thumbs down anymore except for me. So you say whatever you want on YouTube. If your comments are Graham Hancock fanboy comments on YouTube, I typically delete those. We don't need to promote those. Should I say that out loud on the podcast?
Yeah, I think if any Graham Hancock fanboys have made it this far, then I think they've earned the right to put a thumbs down. I think that's fair enough.
They don't. The comments always reveal that they've never listened to anything we've said. So if they're not putting in the effort, then I'm not going to let them have a platform.
Good.
I'm wondering if, because this Graham Hancock second season is starting tomorrow, do you think we should review an episode of that? Because Graham Hancock does numbers online.
Yeah.
Sure. I guess we can.
Maybe do that.
Can we bring back Andrew Kinkella for it or something?
We can ask, yeah.
I'm sure he'd be up
He's
for
so,
it.
Yeah, because he'd really, I think we need someone to like counteract me and Ross's grump, right?
An anti-grump, somebody that's gone through the catacombs and popped out in the Bizarro Paris.
If you've been enjoying Screens of the Stone Age, get in touch with us. Follow us on Twitter at SOTSA_podcast and on Facebook at SOTSA podcast, or send us an email to screensofthestoneage@gmail.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out more at pasc-scpa.ca.